Hello, dear friends. Today we are excited to present to you the most important moments from the press conference, translated into English. During this press conference, many current and significant topics that concern us all were discussed. We hope you enjoy our video. We wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on all our new content, and we would greatly appreciate your likes. And now, we invite you to watch. Enjoy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are concluding our work at the high-level week of the UN General Assembly, the current 79th session. And you probably had the opportunity to get acquainted with my speeches, with the results of those multilateral events that took place within the framework of the Group of 20, BRICS, and other formats. In total, we had 7 multilateral events and 28 rounds of bilateral conversations with my colleagues, during which we discussed all the main issues on the agenda in Russia's relations with the respective states, looked at how the agreements of our leaders on bilateral and regional affairs are being implemented. And much attention was paid, of course, to the Middle East problems. The next outbreaks of conflict both directly in the Palestinian territories and in Lebanon, in Syria. The problem on Iraqi territory, the situation with attempts to involve Iran in order to provoke a very big war in the Middle East. We also talked about conflicts in the Sahara region, Sudan, other parts of Africa, and Afghanistan, and used the opportunity to convey our current assessments of what is happening with regard to the Ukrainian crisis. And in general, I will tell you that our initiatives to form an independent architecture of Eurasian security, to form payment mechanisms that will not depend on the whims of the West, ideas to reform global institutions, in order to reflect in them the real weight of the countries of the world majority of the global South and East. These ideas find a good response. That's what I wanted to say at the beginning, but before proceeding to the questions and answers, I want to congratulate everyone on the International Day of Universal Access to Information celebrated today, which was proclaimed by UNESCO in the 2015 year and fixed the right of everyone to freely seek, receive, and disseminate information. And in this regard, I want to tell you how this day is celebrated in Germany. It is reported that a married couple has been detained there in Germany, who is suspected of organizing the broadcast of several Russian television channels on the internet. It was the customs of the Federal Republic of Germany that made such a message, said that the suspect was a 37-year-old German, and his 42-year-old wife with Ukrainian citizenship. They face firm 1 year of imprisonment. On this day of access to information, the German customs congratulated these people who wanted to freely distribute it. First question, please. UN Correspondents Association. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister. On behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, thanks for the press conference of Valerie Rebic from ANSA, without calling. My question is about Ukraine. Yesterday, the foreign minister, former President Trump, met with President Zelensky and promised that if he is elected, if he wins the elections in November, he will quickly resolve the issue of war. What are your comments on this, and what do you think about this meeting? Thank you. As I understand it, Mr. Trump said some time ago, a few months ago, that he would need 24 hours. Now the wording is different. You know, we will welcome any initiatives that will lead to the desired result. There can be only one result: the settlement of this problem based on the elimination of the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis. The root causes are, first of all, that despite the assurances given to us, NATO continued to expand. The West did not comply with its obligations, which were approved at the highest level in the OSCE, and consisted in ensuring that no one strengthens their security at the expense of infringing on the security of any other country, and that no organization in the OSCE area she did not pretend to be dominant. She was doing exactly that, expanding her expansion, swallowing the state, mastering their territories with her military equipment, infrastructure, and Ukraine was next in line. And this created direct threats to the security of the Russian Federation. Since the NATO plans were to create military bases in the Crimea, on the Sea of Azov, and place their weapons, that would threaten the Russian Federation. We could not allow this, but the main thing is not even that. Although the security of the state is always important, security is needed not as a kind of abstraction, but as something that people need, ordinary people. And now, when the Secretary General and his representative are talking to you, they say that the UN position is unbreakable. The UN stands for resolving the crisis as soon as possible on the basis of international law, the UN Charter, and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. For the heads of the Secretariat, it is necessary to know the Charter more deeply and in more detail. I touched on this at the General Assembly session just now, where I spoke at the plenary meeting. There is the most important thing for me in this charter, and apparently the Founding Fathers also believed, since the very first article proclaims the need to respect the right of every person regardless of race, gender, language, and religion. Our Western colleagues, who for any reason and for no reason put human rights in the foreground, have also done everything to make these rights hypertrophied in the so-called Pact of the Future, brought almost to the fore. It even says that the Human Rights Council should be endowed with some powers that do not depend on member states. But in the case of the Ukrainian crisis, the West does not remember about human rights at all. Russian, however, I have quoted to you the need to respect the rights of every person regardless of language and religion, and reminded the General Assembly today that the Russian language has been legally exterminated in Ukraine from early childhood education up to universities. In the mass media, all means in Russian have either been expelled from Ukraine or closed. В средствах массовой информации все средства на русском языке либо изгнаны из Украины, либо закрыты. In the sphere of culture, books in Russian are thrown out of libraries, as it was in Hitler's Germany. And most recently, a law was passed that banned the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Moreover, the Constitution of Ukraine still states that the state ensures the rights of Russian and other national minorities, including education and so on. But there is no way we can get an answer from either the West or the Secretary General. Why is everyone silent when so many initiatives are floating now about approaches to settlement? The problem of security from the point of view of the inadmissibility of Ukraine's entry into the North Atlantic Alliance, or into any other military bloc, and the problem of human rights. It's not about the territories, as Zelensky asks. Give us the territories along the borders of 1991st year. We are not talking about territories, we are about people who have lived for centuries, developed these lands, built factories, built roads, ships, and much more. These are the true reasons. If Mr. Trump succeeds in repealing these laws that we are talking about, it will already be a step forward. It's easy to do this, just take a vote. But there is also one point that no one mentions now either, but President Putin has repeatedly focused attention on it. Zelensky's decree banning negotiations with Russia is also in effect there. Therefore, how they are going to set up the process, I can't even speculate. But our position is very clear, and it is necessary to eliminate the root causes. Everyone knows about them. Thank you. Abdal Hamid Sayan, era of Big Delhi Al-Quds. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Maria. Mr. Minister, Russia has advocated a multipolar system, cooperation between the leading powers, in order to make this world a little better. Do you think that a war in the Middle East, if Israel and its allies win, will weaken Russia and the Russian doctrine of a multipolar system? How can Russia make this world continue to be built on the basis of cooperation between the leading powers and no one? And without leaving a hegemonic power, first of all in the Middle East, to the events in the Middle East, to all these tragedies, without exaggeration. Not from the point of view of how the denouement will or will not affect our positions in the international arena. We just want to save people's lives. Only in the Palestinian territories after the terrorist attack on the 7th of October, which we harshly condemned, but as a result of the campaign for collective punishment of Palestinians carried out by Israel for a year. After about the 7th of October, 2023 died, now there were new statistics, 41,000 Palestinians, civilians and about 100,000 injured. And these numbers are still growing. 41,000 in a year. For comparison, after a coup d'état took place in Ukraine in the 2014 year, and the puffy ones who came to power declared terrorists people who lived in the east of Ukraine and started a war against them. There was essentially a civil war going on there. So in 10 years, 2.5 times fewer civilians were killed on both sides of the Ukrainian conflict than Palestinians in 1 year. This is a very revealing statistic, and I repeat, it continues to change. So we are interested in the immediate cessation of this massacre. Americans, you are right. They have closed down all the mechanisms that were in place to promote the Middle East processes. First of all, this concerns the quartet of international mediators, which included Russia, the United States, the UN, and the European Union. And now you can see that the Americans want to monopolize mediation efforts and organize different formats with our Jordanian colleagues, then with Egyptian, then with Qatari, but they are still trying to manage all this themselves. It is they who prepare papers that they show to everyone and which they consider to allow ending the conflict. But each time Israel raises its demands, and what happened in Beirut yesterday is another political murder. And I heard President Biden say it was the right decision. They have a slightly different attitude to how to behave in conflicts and what to be guided by. I remember Hillary Clinton, when the bloody Muammar Gaddafi was shown live, how she admired and laughed looking at the screen. Or Madeleine Albright, who, commenting on the processes of the initiated American aggression against Iraq, said, "Well, yes, 400,000 died, but it was worth it. Democracy was worth it." And the fact that there was no real reason, or rather no reason, about which the Americans said that weapons of mass destruction were being produced in Iraq has been well known to everyone for a long time. This does not change the matter. Yes, the Americans want to monopolize the processes, not only in the Middle East. They want to lead the so-called Indo-Pacific space. They are assembling various bloc structures such as AUKUS, Quad, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, South Korea. And the Philippines are also being drawn into something similar to Quad. They are active there. Here they are, when they deal with regional problems, they just think about only one thing, to preserve their hegemony and to lead everything. We don't have such ambitions. I think it is simply inhumane to turn a blind eye to thousands and hundreds of thousands of victims, while continuing to move towards the main goal, to remain in the post of hegemon.
Today.
Sergei Viktorovich, good afternoon. A lot was said at this General Assembly about reforming the UN. And recently, Finnish President Alexander Stupa also reflected on this topic and proposed to exclude Russia from the Security Council. To what extent is this possible at all, and how should such proposals be treated? Thank you very much. Hot Finnish guys, they are a special people. I know Alexander Stubb well when he was foreign minister. When he visited Tbilisi immediately after the end of the five-day war unleashed by Saakashvili against South Ossetia and against Russian peacekeepers, and on the way back he stopped by Moscow. And we were sitting one-on-one with him, preparing for negotiations with our experts. And he did not tell about his impressions of Saakashvili's meeting. This is an obscene expression, I mean the adjective, and the noun he used is a lunatic. You can guess what the adjective was. I tell him, "So you tell everyone what kind of person he is." He says no, but why? As if it is not necessary. Therefore, you can cite a lot of stories from Scandinavian folklore, but seriously speaking, I was more surprised by something else. He wants to be more Ukrainian than Ukrainians. I know that Kiev representatives are constantly talking about the illegitimacy of the Russian Federation, since the Charter records the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. But for a moment, I want to say that the Charter records the Republic of China, not the People's Republic of China. Everything remains as it was when the UN was created, when Taiwan represented China. And when the People's Republic of China regained its rights, when Russia, as the successor of the Soviet Union, became a member of the Security Council, they simply decided not to change anything, because everything is clear to everyone. But going back to what I started to say, I was more surprised by the Secretary General, who said, speaking about the reform of the Security Council, what is needed. Europe is overrepresented, and France, Great Britain, and the Russian Federation are among the permanent members of Europe. I met with him yesterday. I asked, "Do you really think that we are connected with London and Paris in the same world?" He says, "Well, who else are these?" This understanding of the geopolitical picture of the world suggests serious thoughts. This is the UN-Secretary General, after all.
Yes, please.
Please. Thank you very much, Minister, for the opportunity. I would like to ask this question. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday, after he left the building, a building built to maintain international peace and security after the attack, they will dial. And as you mentioned, the leader of the Arch Kabbalah was killed by Nasrallah as a result of the attack. Do you think the killing will allow Israel to stop? Or maybe Israel will want to seize southern Lebanon?
Remember Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed in the Iranian capital, where he participated in the funeral ceremony of the former president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is not just a political murder, but some kind of particularly cynical one. There was a strike on the Iranian consulate in Syria, and Iranian citizens were also killed. And now I'm shitting. Well, actually, it doesn't just seem to me, many people say, that apparently Israel wants to create an excuse for the United States to get involved in this war directly. And in order to create such an excuse, they are trying in every possible way to provoke Iran, and the same Hezbollah. It seems to me that the Iranian leaders are behaving extremely responsibly, and this needs to be properly assessed. But you know, by the way, there are parallels with Ukraine. Zelensky, after all, is also doing everything to provoke involvement in hostilities. He wants to provoke the involvement of NATO countries in direct hostilities, and then he will simply step aside and look at what he believes will save him. I don't think this is the right way. I am convinced that we just need to stop the bloodshed and abandon the essentially terrorist methods of settling political scores.
Yes, please.
NTV, Lebanon, thank you. Maria, I am glad to see you, Minister Lavrov. Do you think the murder of Hassan Nasrallah will lead to some kind of retaliatory measures from Iran? It is widely believed among Hezbollah followers that Iran has left Hezbollah with the slogans, "We will support Hezbollah," "We will fight together with Hezbollah." But when the important moment came, as usual, Iran just watched, used its intermediaries, and, as a rule, never gets involved in such events. What is your opinion?
Something about Iran's problems, Iran's interests, and I can't answer questions about what Iran is going to do. It's just incorrect and impolite.
Hi, Minister.
Good afternoon, Minister. Show Doka, Chinese television. 2 questions. The first one, very briefly. President Zelensky has repeatedly said here in the building that Russia is planning an attack on nuclear power plants in Ukraine. How do you respond to this? We know that Brazil, China, and other like-minded countries have created a platform for friends, for peace, for mediation, for resolving the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. Is Russia considering any plans from the global south?
Mr. Zelensky, but I think everyone has long been accustomed to his impromptu. When he played on stage and voiced the written text, He did better, but the impromptu ones are naughty. He stated that each item of the peace formula is based on the principles, goals, and norms of the UN Charter. He, by the way, described the Sino-Brazilian initiative in a bawdy way, said that it was unclear why they put it forward. Maybe they want to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And he went on to say that there are no different versions of the UN Charter for different parts of the world. There is no separate charter for the BRICS or the Group of Seven. There is no separate, for some reason, Russian-Iranian UN Charter, or a separate Chinese-Brazilian UN Charter. So he appreciated the efforts that our Chinese, Brazilian colleagues are clearly making out of the best intentions. At the previous stage, we discussed their plans in contacts with my colleagues, and I asked what the specific content of the initiative would be, because the words are all correct in the Chinese-Brazilian 6 or 5 points. Calls for peace, calls for justice, the implementation of international law, but no one disputes this. But no one has told me exactly how they plan to move towards peace, and I just know that this issue is still under consideration. And the fact that the creation of this group of friends was announced, which did not include all the countries that attended the meeting. Some did not show such interest. This group has been established here in New York at the level of permanent representatives. I do not know how seriously this issue can be dealt with from here. Permanent representatives are talented people. Let's see what they will produce. But the most important thing is what I was talking about when answering the first question. President Xi Jinping, when he put forward not a Ukrainian, but a global security initiative in February of the 23rd year. There is a key phrase there that this initiative is dedicated to any conflicts and approaches to resolving any conflicts. Among the key method of considering tasks in a particular crisis region, it says explicitly that it is necessary to agree on eliminating the root causes of the conflict. The root causes of the conflict in Ukraine are the involvement of the Kiev regime in NATO. This goal remains on the agenda. Mr. Stoltenberg and other representatives of the North Atlantic Alliance regularly repeat it with enviable persistence. The second is, of course, what I said about human rights. Russian language, Russian culture, Russian education, canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church extermination. In Israel, by the way, no one banned the Arabic language. Russian was banned by Zelensky, although it is spoken not only by ethnic Russians, but also by the majority of the population of Ukraine. Therefore, those specific people who will be here at the level of permanent missions to concretize this initiative, they cannot ignore these arguments and these root causes. Moreover, they will have to be guided by the principles of the Charter, not selectively, but in their entirety, and in all their interrelationship. There are also the very human rights that I mentioned. This is the principle of the Charter. It is grossly violated. The Ukrainian constitution still, I repeat, contains obligations to respect the rights of national minorities in all aspects. And of course, interpreting the principle of territorial integrity, one cannot ignore its relationship with the principle of self-determination of peoples. There is a consensus on this, too. Back in 1970, I spoke about this to our Chinese, Brazilian, and other colleagues. The General Assembly unanimously adopted a declaration in which it decided that it is necessary to respect the territorial integrity of those states whose governments represent all the people living on this territory and respect the right to self-determination. Why did everyone take it so calmly when Kosovo was declared unilaterally independent in 2000? And the United States applauded it, we said. This is a manifestation, a practical manifestation of the nation's right to self-determination. And when, a few years later, no military actions were conducted in Kosovo, and when, a few years later, in the 2014 year after the bloody coup in Ukraine, the fascists seized power and went to war on Crimea, and Crimea held a referendum, the Americans said, "No, this is impossible, because the principle of territorial integrity applies here. It is very important that those who want to sincerely help to find a solution to this crisis understand the true causes and rely on the Charter." He is not like Mr. Dews Harik, as he said, it is necessary to be guided by the UN Charter and the principle of territorial integrity of Ukraine. It is necessary to rely on the mouth. It is in all its completeness and in all the interrelation of its principles. This is my request, a message to those who will work in this group of the world.
Good afternoon, Sergei Viktorovich, wrote in French, a representative of the separatists who operate on the territory of Mali, on the air of the France 24 TV channel stated that they maintain contacts with Ukraine. How would Russia? We are allies of Somali. Could Russia comment on this? The fact that there are contacts between those who are against the Malian state and Ukraine, and what needs to be done so that the international community calls Ukraine to account for this. Thank you.
We have already commented on this situation. It has been proven on the facts that Ukrainians are working with terrorist organizations that are fighting the legitimate government of Mali. And not so long ago, there was an attack on a convoy, on a group of Malian servicemen with a large number of dead. And it was done by terrorists associated with Ukrainians. This is not the only point on the planet. On the territory of Syria, in the Idlib zone of escalation, de-escalation, Hayat Tahrir still runs there. And Ukrainians also have ties with them. They either recruit militants there in order to send them to the battlefields, or maybe they help them prepare some kind of provocations. It is significant that after the murder of Malian servicemen by terrorists in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, appealed to the Security Council to condemn such activities of Ukrainians. And even, in my opinion, two of these countries, in my opinion, have severed diplomatic relations. Of course, this is banditry, and we will do everything to ensure that African countries that want to live with their own minds and choose their own ways of development so that they have support in ensuring their security and defense capability. We are doing this.
Yes, please.
Mr. Lavrov, Brazil. The question is again on the Chinese-Brazilian initiative. Yesterday, the statement said that the legitimate interests of the parties are taken into account. This was read out after what you just said. And do you think that at least this plan will allow us to break the deadlock that has developed for today? And, as you said, the root causes must be eliminated. Yesterday, the declaration clearly stated the reasons. We have just quoted and compared it with what I have just said. I didn't see the action plan in the document. I saw a statement of intent here. This is such a form, you know how to fight for all the good and against all the bad. The action plan will already be a document that You know, many years ago, we once again considered the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in the Security Council. Then the Quartet of Mediators, the Quartet of Russia, the United States, the UN Secretariat, and the European Union developed a roadmap for a Palestinian-Israeli settlement through the creation of an independent Palestinian state. It was prescribed for 1 year, and it was fixed what steps should be taken every month. That was the plan, but you understand that it did not materialize. Otherwise, we would not have seen the war that is now unleashed in the Middle East. And my advice, as I have already said, to those people who will work in New York as part of this group, the group of Friends of the World, read the Charter. I have already spoken in as much detail as possible at the plenary meeting, here and at the Security Council. Wherever I have not said this, all this has been known for a long time. It started with a coup d'etat. All these years, we have warned not to be dragged into NATO, warned not to touch Russian citizens. And when Zelensky, 6 months before our special operation, said in an interview, to the question of how he treats people who are on the other side of the contact line in the Donbas, who did not accept the coup, and against whom the Kiev regime began to fight because of this. And the journalist asked him, "How do you feel about those people?" He said, "But there are people, and there are creatures, individuals. And that's why I think if you feel like you live in Ukraine, you feel like you belong to Russian culture, falling into Russia." Has anyone reacted to this? When the ambassador of this very Ukraine in Kazakhstan, giving an interview, said, Our main goal is to kill as many Russians as possible so that our children have less work left." Has any of the journalists attracted the attention of their readers to this? I don't remember. So there is a serious question here. And just to say we will take your interests into account, but that's not enough. The only thing I don't understand is how the French and the Swiss turned out to be at this meeting yesterday. They cannot be called neutral for a long time, the Swiss and the French and NATO members simply. Both countries actively, zealously advocate for Ukraine, demand Ukraine's victory over the Russian Federation. Supply, as the French do, including long-range weapons, missiles. But somehow it was strange to know that these people were. I asked our Chinese colleague, he says. They asked very, very much, and we collectively decided to invite them as observers. In general, this group still has to work and work. We are ready to help them, advice. The main thing is that they base their proposals on realities and do not take them somehow from abstract conversations. They are ready to help.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you to Maria, Mr. Minister. Pamela Folk, US News Report. I remember you. Thank you for the briefing. The question is mine. In the development of what was asked last year, could you tell if there are any negotiations or statuses on Ukrainian children who were taken to Russia? You talked about the commissioner, about her work, about 100 of them, but about 19,000 children, according to the Red Cross. As far as I understand, also some countries, the frame is an intermediary. Such materials, probably, you do not have a representative in Moscow. Is there no representative of yours in Moscow? Last year, we invited Pamela personally, but she didn't come. Do you have your representative in Moscow? No, I moved to another news organization. I mean your current news organization. I need to check. I don't know. And he will say we have information. The information has been updated many times since our last meeting. I'm not going to recall the figures now, but we invited many foreign journalists to special briefings, and not quite recently. Some time ago, there were facts that many hundreds of those children who were on the lists of allegedly abducted by Russia, they were found in Germany. There are a lot of guys who suffer from unconventional hobbies. So this is a difficult question. Pamela, I'm sorry. So, we want to repeat the invitation to you again in your new capacity, to come to Moscow, conduct interviews with officials. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister of CBC of Turkey. First of all, Turkey's acquisition of C-400, Turkey in Russia, creates tension. And as a result, a former Turkish minister recently suggested that Turkey could sell a C to a 403rd country, India or Pakistan. How will Russia react to such a potential sale of C-400 to these countries in IKEA? Will it have consequences for Russian-Turkish relations? And the second question. Former President Donald Trump said that the war in Ukraine would not have started if he had been in office. And if he is re-elected, he will end the war on the first day. Will Russia openly react to Trump's peace proposal in case of re-election? What conditions should there be for Russia to agree to this? C-400 air defense systems that were, missile defense systems that were supplied by Turkey. I have nothing to comment on. President Erdogan is an experienced statesman, and he makes decisions on any issue in the interests of his people and his state. The only thing is that there is a specific addition that in the contracts for the sale of weapons there is a column about the end-use certificate. And in order for the products that are delivered with such a certificate, in which the country that received these weapons is indicated as the end user, in order to do something else with them, the consent of the country to which these weapons were sold is necessary. About Mr. Trump. You see, the war would never have started if. I can also show you a retrospective like this. February of the 14th year, the then President Yanukovych and his opposition, who brought hundreds of people to the main square with Western money using Western equipment for endless protest, and signed an agreement that there would be early elections, and before these elections would be held, a government of national unity, temporary, would be created. And this was guaranteed by Germany, France, and Poland. And when the opposition seized the government building the next morning, and we asked why and why it was done, our French and German colleagues told us, well, you know, democracy sometimes takes unpredictable zigzags. And the Americans have now said the same thing. Now, if that agreement had been fulfilled, Ukraine would have been within the very borders of 1991, which Mr. Zelensky talks about, excuse the jargon. Who asked them to undermine their own legitimacy. They have undermined it forever, as long as this regime remains in power. and then Crimea would have remained in Ukraine. I want everyone to understand if we follow the logic of if the Minsk agreements, which were signed a year later and not just signed, were enshrined in a Security Council resolution. If they were fulfilled, Ukraine would still be whole, but apart from Crimea already, because they lost Crimea when they brought bandits to power. If in April of the 22nd year, when an agreement was reached in Istanbul between Russian and Ukrainian negotiators, that agreement would have been fulfilled, Ukraine would still have retained even some part of Donbass. But every time an agreement breaks down, which Russia always goes to, every time Ukraine becomes smaller. And regarding the Istanbul agreements, the head of the Ukrainian delegation recently gave an interview and admitted that Boris Johnson came to Kiev and said, "I don't need any agreements, let's fight on, we'll throw you weapons, money, and something else." So it's not a question of what. I have just given you the facts, and if Ukraine continues to go the same way, if it uses some tricks again in order to gain time, it will not succeed. And I really hope that our Chinese, Brazilian friends, and all those who have joined this group of friends of the world will fully take into account the manners and habits of the current Ukrainian leadership and its endless attempts to lure everyone into a very shaky ground.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Mr. Minister, and for the press briefing and the allocated time, the Azerbaijani news agency Salo. My question is the following. President Ilham Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan will participate in the upcoming BRICS summit next month in October in Russia. Is there any planned meeting between the leaders of the two countries in order for there to be peace talks on the Russian initiative or with Russian participation? As they say, and dak tudum, if they want to date like them. The ministers met here with the participation of the American Secretary of State. The Americans really want them to be dominant here, just as we discussed the Middle East. It is important for the Americans to show that they are the masters, and if this suits our Azerbaijani and Armenian friends, then it is probably the choice of the appropriate leaders. We are always ready to carry out what we agreed to with our participation, starting from November 2020. And within 2 years, our leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia met 3 more times. A trilateral working group was created to unblock transport communications. There are mechanisms for delineating the border, and so on, and so on. We are ready to fulfill all our obligations that are fixed there.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Media Network, a brief question about the assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. What can Russia do to prevent the spread of secession and Iraq? Russia calls on Turkey to normalize relations. If this happens, how will it affect the Syrian Kurds? Thank you.
I repeat once again, we want the Security Council to show its will and fulfill its functions. The Security Council has tools that allow it to influence the side that does not comply with its decisions. The Americans do not allow the Security Council to take such actions. All for the same reason. They want to hold everything in their hands, and the problems that exist in the world already do not fit in one hand and even in two do not fit. So this is our answer. They blocked all proposals, and the resolution that they themselves submitted for adoption was a deceptive step. Because immediately the Americans said that Israel was ready to implement it, it was a lie. And we, anticipating this, refrained and did not quote her only because Arab friends asked us to give her a chance. As for how to prevent the conflict from spilling over into other countries, it seems to me that this is what I have answered you. What we can and will do. At the request of the legitimate government, we have a military contingent in the Syrian Arab Republic that helps to ensure security, and it will perform all its functions. But I repeat once again, I have a feeling that there are those who want to provoke Iran in order to then provoke the United States and unleash a real big one. Now they are also real, but to unleash a full-fledged war in this entire region. And the second question about. Yes, we had meetings about the Syrian-Turkish normalization last year. The military met. The foreign ministers met as part of Russia, Iran, Turkey, Syria, as the Astana Troika on the Syrian settlement, and the Syrian Arab Republic itself. The meetings were positive. We literally, just recently, talked with my Turkish colleague here and talked about it. I have also talked about this with the new foreign minister of the Syrian Arab Republic. There are ideas on both sides that, in my opinion, should allow this process to resume. And yes, you are right, of course, the Kurdish issue will be one of the main issues during these negotiations, along with the issues of suppressing the risks of terrorism and ensuring border security. There were precedents. There is the Adana Agreement back in the 80s of the last century. It is now unlikely to be directly applicable. But the concept that is laid down in it, and which involves interaction with Syria and Turkey in ensuring security at the border and suppressing terrorist groups, this concept is quite applicable. It needs to be adapted. A huge problem is the activity of the United States, which wants everything in its own way here, ignoring the interests of both Turkey and Syria, are illegally on the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic, on the left bank of the Euphrates, have created a quasi-state there in fact, extract Syrian oil, harvest Syrian grain, sell and use this money to support their wars.
Зерна сирийского продают и на эти деньги содержат своих подопечных.
I am convinced that the Kurdish organizations must categorically dissociate themselves from terrorism and must finally understand that they have no other choice but to live as part of the Syrian state. And at some stage, we were ready to provide our mediation services. We met with their leaders, they know our position, but for some reason, as soon as they turned to us for help, when President Trump announced that they were leaving Syria, instantly, representatives of the Kurds came to talk to us. A few days later, the Americans said, "We have changed our mind, we are not leaving there." And the Kurds lost interest. This is a conjunctural position that does not reflect the long-term vision, the vision of the future of the Kurdish people. They need to negotiate with Damascus, and, as I understand it, the Turkish neighbors are ready to help in this.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Minister Lavrov. I have two questions. The first one is for the Middle East. The second one is for Ukraine, the Middle East, after. After the rejection of Minister Netanyahu's latest ceasefire proposal, is there a possibility of implementing Resolution 2735 in these conditions of escalation in the region? And on Ukraine, President Putin said that lifting restrictions on the use of long-range missiles supplied by the West to Ukraine would be a declaration of war. As we understand it now, they are close to announcing the lifting of these restrictions. Maybe they will limit it to 20 or 40 kilometers, but it can happen.
What did I tell you? About Resolution 2735, you are addressing the wrong address with the question of whether it is possible. Whether it is possible to implement it now. This is a question for Israel first of all, but also for the United States. They assured that this was a resolution that would dramatically ease tensions, start de-escalation. They said this, serious people. Deceived all of us. I don't see Israel's desire to fulfill any peace plans.
Yes, please.
I answered it.
Thank you, Minister Lavrov Arabic. You have just said that you would like the Security Council to assume responsibility for preventing a wider full-scale war in the region. What tools do you think the Security Council could use in light of the constant use of the veto, especially on Gaza, and do you think Chapter 7 should be considered?
Indeed, he said that the Security Council has opportunities, and they include the 7th chapter of the UN Charter. Although all Security Council resolutions must be implemented. This is stated in Article 25 of the Charter, but Chapter 7, it is still so compulsory for those to whom the requirements of the relevant decision of the Security Council are addressed. There are demands to stop arms supplies, to put on the table a resolution to stop arms supplies. In any conflict, when it goes too far. Well, of course, everyone understands that the Americans will put pressure on it, as they vitalized everything that happened before. It is possible to propose sanctions against those who do not comply with the requirements of the Security Council. But this will also be quoted. Therefore, there are tools, but it seems to me that we should not give up because the resolution is blocked. Because blocking also doesn't always work out painlessly to your own reputation. Maybe it will give something. As we say, water sharpens a stone. But the situation is complicated.
Gentleman from far.
The man in the back, please. Mr. Minister. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday that Israel's long arm can reach everyone in the Middle East. Given the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, do you expect any prospects in terms of the Middle East peace process? The first part. The second part. Can Russia agree to the expansion of the Security Council, the expansion of the permanent membership from 5 to 10 members? If you have comments on this topic.
The first question, I think I have already answered you several times, is how we feel about what is happening. It needs to be stopped urgently. As for the reform of the Security Council, I have not heard the idea of making 10 permanent members. There are a lot of ideas floating around. Our position is well known. It is necessary to strengthen the Council, solely at the expense of candidates from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. There can be no expansion of the number of Western countries and their allies like Japan.
Yes, Edith, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for the press conference. We are always extremely glad when you communicate with us. Could you comment on the changes in the nuclear doctrine of Russia, which President Putin recently announced?
Изменения в ядерной доктрине России, о которых недавно объявил президент Путин.
Is this a signal to the West? And if so, what kind of signal would Moscow like to send?
He said, and everything is clear there, without any exceptions. And when we say something publicly, especially when the President speaks publicly, we assume that those who are interested in our approaches, they hear it. How they understand it is not for me to judge. We will understand how they understand this when it becomes finally clear whether they will go over, whether they will give Ukraine permission for long-range guns, and then it will be clear that they are. How they understood what they heard.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much, Minister Lavrov Horkostos. A few questions. The BRICS summit will be held in 3 weeks. Are Latin American countries expected to participate? And the second part of the question is, how does Russia relate to the political situation in Latin America?
Certainly not as the Monroe Doctrine. We have a respectful attitude towards all our Latin American partners. This is a powerful pole of the emerging polycentric world order and the fact that CILAC is now gaining a second wind after President Lula came to power. There are many initiatives, including initiatives aimed at creating mechanisms that allow trading, cooperation, investment, not depending on those mechanisms, which are controlled by the United States through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. As for the prospects for the expansion of BRICS, at this stage, all members consider it advisable not to make new decisions yet, and adapt the organization. An association is not an organization, it is an association of like-minded people. There were 5 of us, it became 10. Of course, this requires some kind of habituation and smooth entry of new members into the work, taking into account the traditions that have developed over the years of the existence of the 5. But the Kazan summit will consider the recommendations that were requested by the leader last year. And the leaders last year at the Johannesburg summit will make a proposal on how the modalities of a new category, the category of BRICS partner countries, could look like, which will participate on a permanent basis, not as invited, but as permanent partners, in almost most types of activities of our structure.
Постоянные партнеры участвовать, практически в большинстве видов деятельности нашей структуры.
And there are about 20 lists of such candidates who already want to become partners, and more than a dozen more just want to maintain constant contacts without necessarily acquiring the status of a partner.
Просто хотят поддерживать постоянные контакты, не обязательно обретая статус партнера.
The decision will be made by the President. It's not up to me now to prejudge how they will agree, but it will certainly be announced.
Sergei Viktorovich, good afternoon. You mentioned Georgia in your speech today. How would you comment on the latest statement by Georgian officials that Saakashvili started the war after all? And do you think any new agreements between Georgia, South Ossetia, and Abkhazia are possible and real?
It is obvious that the current Georgian leadership is just honestly assessing the past. That's what they said, that we want a historical reconciliation. In what form this reconciliation can take place, it is up to the countries of Abkhazia and South Ossetia themselves. They are neighbors with Georgia. Some contacts are inevitable there anyway. If there is interest from all sides in normalizing these relations, ensuring a non-aggression agreement so that no one ever wants to again. If the parties are interested, we will be ready to help. And the fact that Saakashvili started the war was known to everyone, except, perhaps, our Western colleagues. And Georgian President Mrs. Zarubashvili, because right after 2008 year, a study or investigation was ordered by the European Union, which was conducted by the respected Swiss Heidi Tagliavini, and in whose report on the results of this investigation, it was clearly written that Saakashvili started it all.
Уважаемая швейцарка Хейди Тальявини, и в докладе которой по итогам этого расследования четко было написано, что начал все это Саакашвили.
Therefore, there is no need to even be surprised. And the last two questions, please. I'm going to get up, because I can't see otherwise. Let me welcome you again, Mr. Minister, Mr. Lavrov, and you, Maria, Masha, we have known you for a long time. Microphone, please, the microphone is not turned on, it is not audible. Yes, closer, please, the microphone is on. Of course, I want to agree that books should not be burned anywhere, including in this country, where this is the case these days. I was surprised by your speech. Can you leave it like that? Do not move the microphone, otherwise the sound will float. Why did you mention Butch? If I were a Russian noble, I would try to ignore it. What surprised you? The question is as follows. Why did you mention Butch? Butch. If I were a Russian official, I would ignore this bloody massacre. And you included this in your Guinness speech. Not only in his speech. I talk about it every time. I met with Anthony Guterres last year at a meeting of the Security Council, where he was present the year before that. Evelyn. Explanation. You probably, here I am just amazed, as today is the day of access to information. What is it called? Here you do not have access to information that just float openly both on the internet and in social networks. In Istanbul, in April of the 22nd year, an agreement was reached that we would cease hostilities and accept an agreement with the Ukrainians, and when Boris Johnson thwarted it, even before all this failed, we were asked as a gesture of goodwill to withdraw troops from the outskirts of Kiev, from this, including this. We made the village of Bucha, thinking that we were dealing with decent people and not liars, but of course we were deceived.
От окраины Киева, из этой, включая эту деревню Буча. Мы сделали, думая, что мы имеем дело с приличными людьми, а не лгунами, но нас, конечно, обманули.
And there is a video on the internet, when after the Russian troops left there, the mayor of this city, the mayor, proudly says to the camera that we have regained control of our small homeland, We are now the masters here again. There are no Russians here.
Мы вернули контроль над нашей родиной малой. Мы, значит, теперь здесь опять хозяева, русских здесь нет.
2 days have passed, and suddenly the BBC team of the glorious media agency, the BBC team, shows television footage not somewhere in the basement, but on the central street of this butch.
Команда BBC показывает телевизионные кадры не где-то в подвале, а на центральной улице этой Бучи.
A wide, long street where the bodies are laid, and the Russians said this, respectively, when they were here, they committed such a crime.
И сказали, вот это вот русские, соответственно, значит, когда здесь были, они вот совершили такое преступление.
I repeat, it was 2 days after we left there.
Мы оттуда ушли. И
New sanctions were announced in this regard. And since then, it's useless to count on any investigation. We followed the simplest path. We asked if it was possible to see a list of names of people whose corpses were shown on the BBC. And there was silence. I asked Guterres and told him about it again yesterday. He says, well, we will turn again. They have already appealed to the Ukrainian regime. No one tells them anything. If he doesn't report it, then there's nothing to hide. And the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights applied at our request. No one tells us anything. The question is closed. Butch, mess, Putin from butcher, you knew, as Biden described it all. Therefore, there is no mystery here for us. This is a provocation of the purest water. Just like when Navalny is mentioned out of the night, when he got sick and the Germans asked to give him for treatment. We immediately missed their plane, he was taken away. Even the necessary aviation formalities were not observed. And he was there with them, and in a civilian hospital, where they found nothing with him. And then he was transferred to a military hospital, where they found this substance Novichok. From him. Then he was cured, returned, and died here. And we asked the Germans, when he was there, to show tests that prove that he was poisoned with this substance. The Germans said it was a secret, and that they would give this analysis to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. We went there. Can I see it? We were told that the Germans forbade us to show it to you. Doesn't anything seem strange to you here? Therefore, when the uproar broke out after Navalny's death, we once again reminded the Germans, can we see what the analysis was, and how you treated him before he returned to Russia? The silence is complete. The same thing about the poisoning of the Skripals in Salisbury. No information, despite official requests from our investigative committee and the Prosecutor General's office to their colleagues in Britain. The media foam has been torn off. Russia has been blamed for everything, and it immediately leaves the front pages from television screens. We know. Therefore, we will talk about Buchaya, about Navalny, and demand the truth. And you, if you are interested, organize a journalistic investigation. Well, just ask Ukrainians why it is impossible to get these names. My friends, but you are professionals, I hope you should be interested. Or you will be like Evelyn saying, and what is it that Lavrov started talking about the trouble? It's their crime, and he's talking about it. Come on, try to find out something.
Final question, please. You need to press the button. Antonio Guterres recently said that Russia and the United States should reduce their nuclear arsenal. Did he personally tell you about this at the meeting? And under what conditions is Russia ready to do this?
He didn't tell me anything. By the way, I didn't hear him say that. He sometimes has such statements that clearly do not fit into the existing realities in the international arena. We are not increasing our arsenal. This is once again confirmed by our official representatives. They are valid until the 26th year. The strategic offensive arms treaties between Russia and the United States, where the corresponding levels are fixed, we are guided by them, at least as long as this treaty is in force. We suspended our participation in it, but said that we would comply with the levels and exchange some types of information with the Americans. But of course, it's not for the Secretary General to decide such issues, it seems to me. I always want there to be fewer weapons, but there are realities. I want to say this again.
Dear colleague,
Dear colleagues, thank you.